All right, great. Thanks everybody for joining. Those of you who aren't able to be here with us live, today we have a special presenter. This is Charles Hulbert-Powell from the Cornwall Historical Churches Trust. A couple of months ago, he wrote an article for our monthly newsletter about the works of his organization and what they're doing to preserve and renovate churches throughout Cornwall. And today we're doing a follow-up presentation where you can go into more depth, share photos, and solicit interest in helping to drive the mission of his organization. So, Charles, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll start sharing my screen now as well.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Johnny, for setting up the Zoom. And thank you to you all for joining me today. As Johnny said, my name's Charles Hulbert-Powell. I'm a committee member of the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust. And I'm making this call from Lostwithiel, Cornwall. As you probably understand, my name is not Cornish. I actually hails from the north of England. My mother was a St. Aubyn, and she lived on St. Michael's Mount in her youth. I'm aware that you probably know a lot more about your Cornish heritage than I do. And I know you can get quantities of information from social media postings. But my talk today is really about the Trust, now 75 years old, what we do to preserve ancient and more modern buildings, possibly places where your ancestors may have worshipped. And we're fundraising, and I hope you will be generous. I thought I might look at some of the places where immigrants lived in the 19th century and before, which are a bit off the beaten track, where tourists would normally go. And I'd like to talk about some people, miners, farmers, tradespeople, who left and why they made the momentous decision to leave the place of their birth. Hopefully, it will be new information to you. We'll also like to talk about a few personalities which you may not have heard of. During my research, I was amazed at the widespread various common Cornish names became as migrants spread across America. Such names as Pascoe, Edgecombe, Hocking, Kernow, Trinberth, Tredinnick, Penrose, Trevick, Trice, Vivian, and many more. And equally, I'm surprised at the number of Cornish names which you find who are still here and still live in the county. The map I'm showing you now came to me from the Cornwall Maritime Trust in Falmouth, and it shows four principal areas of the county. Penwith, you can see, is in the far west. Trehenhale, which is in the middle. Blackmore, which is more or less the same, and Foymore, which is in the east. And somebody mentioned Falmouth, which of course is, as you can see, Tywin Hale. The river runs up into the area, and that was really the principal mining areas in the county. In the 18th century, there wasn't a county in Britain that was more mineral wealthy than Cornwall. Tin had been in Cornwall since 1000 BC. According to archaeology, who've done some research in Mounts Bay last year, and copper was a significant part of the mineral wealth of the county. In fact, tin was traded from Marazan, which is opposite St. Michael's Mount, in medieval times. And actually, Joseph of Arimathea, who was the sort of stepfather of Jesus Christ, was said to have visited the county. And some of the names you find are where it's called Place, of which I think there are 3 or 4 in Cornwall, was where he was alleged to have landed. And the real growth of the county came in the 19th century. In 1800, there were 16,000 miners employed in 75 pits. In 1837, there were 30,000 miners employed in 200 pits. The total county population grew from 200,000 to 350,000 people. In one copper mining area on the east side of Bodmin, which is Foymore on the map, near Liskeard, is the village of St. Clear. In 1850, there were 4,000 people. In 1840, there were mining allowed them to build a railway between St. Clear and the port of Looe. In 1853, 209,000 tons were dug. And if you show the next slide, that's the port of Looe as it looks today. You can see it's very much a fishing port. You can't see the railway because, in fact, it's the other side of the bridge. So, and it's completely tidal, this river. It goes down to just a few inches when the tide is out. And if we go to the next slide, this is an engine house in Minions, which is again on the east side of Bodmin Moor, again near the village of St Cleer. Tin and copper were mined here. It's been restored, although it doesn't have a roof, and that's simply to make it safe so that visitors can actually go inside it. And the next slide, please. This is what the landscape looks like today. And you can see these little mounds, which are basically mine waste. It's now been returned, as you can see, to rock and grazing for sheep and cattle. And if you're looking to the east from here, you can see Dartmoor, and to the west, you can see the China clay pits. It's a very rugged, open place, not a very nice place to go and work. The mining is an unhealthy occupation, as I'm sure you know, and life and limb suffered. In 1787, Grenapp, Redruth and Cornwall, in the Tywin Hale area, which I described, was a desert. The inhabitants were unhealthy, mostly due to malnutrition, disease and hard work. It is said that 1 in 5 miners died accidentally in the pits of Grenapp in the 19th century. There were, of course, no mining regulations or trade unions to fight for improved conditions, and the average age of the miner was about 24. By the time he'd reached 40, young men were more productive. It was a financially risky occupation, not only for the adventurer, who was basically the shareholder, stockholder, but also for the miners, who were actually known as tut workers. They earned about 40 to 50 shillings a month, which is about $583 in good times. They were split into what were known as pairs. The miners would compete for the price of their work in certain areas, in other words, the loads of the mine. If the loads were unproductive, their pay would be effective. Before the arrival of unions, this practice was quite common in the coal industry, where the wages were related to the value of coal. There was also other activities which miners could indulge, particularly fishing pilchards, when they arrived on the Cornish coast, but that was normally only in August, and it was a relatively short period. For a dozen pilchards, a customer would pay a penny, which in dollars is about $1.30. In 1874, 48 mines closed, following a catastrophic decline in the price of tin and copper. Destitution and poverty followed. So moving to America allowed miners to earn 3 times what they were earning in Cornwall. In the last 4 decades of the 19th century, 118,000 people left Cornwall, which equated to a third of the population. 44.8% of males between the ages of 15 and 24 left Cornwall, and that's according to the West Briton newspaper at the time. There were national and international reasons for copper prices declining. Open cast mining in Anglesey, North Wales, opened in 1770. The extraction from open mines, of course, was cheaper than deep mining. There were tariffs for imported copper. Robert Peel in 1842, he was the Prime Minister at the time, reduced the import tariffs on tin and abolished them in 1845. Copper tariffs ended in 1848, and this contributed again to the decline of the mining industry. Added to the competition, copper was found below the layers of tin, and that meant that only mines with plenty of capital could afford to mine them. The miners, of course, who were skilled in deep mining were encouraged to leave on the discovery of silver, gold, lead, tin in many parts of America. There were various points of exit for the migrants in Cornwall. If you could look at the next slide. Falmouth, Padstow, Bude, Foy, and Charleston. And this slide shows Charleston, which looks very much the same as it did some 2 centuries ago. Whilst it's still a working port, it's also a favoured film set. Poldark and other productions have been filmed here. There are normally more boats in the harbour, but the lock gates are actually being repaired, which is why it's more or less empty at the moment. Migrants also went from other ports, such as Liverpool. Amongst the migrant ships were fast-sailing clippers. They raced across the Atlantic and to do the journey in 29 days. And one of the reasons the clippers came to Britain was to attach copper to their hulls, which stopped weeds and other boring sea life, which infested the hulls, and by putting copper on, gave them greater speed, and they could go to places like Anglesey where it would be fitted from them. But the passenger accommodation was limited on these ships, and they charged a great deal more for the crossing. Most passengers travelled steerage, and the top price was at £12, which is about $58, but was later reduced to £3, presumably because of demand, which equated about only $14. And whilst the early settlers arrived in the Carolinas, New York, and Boston, a lot of miners came in via Quebec. This was hazardous because of bad weather, and it was difficult to navigate the St. Lawrence River. But it was quite a reasonable voyage to get to the mining areas of Wisconsin. Miners, of course, flocked to California for the gold rush, and some came direct from Cornwall. In order to get to California, you could take a 17,000 round trip round Cape Horn. It was an option, but it was a dangerous journey, and there were many fatalities from doing that route. Another passage route was from the east coast of America, a march across Panama through dense jungles of difficult terrain for about 47 miles, and then a ship to San Francisco. A railway, of course, was built across the Panama, and eventually, of course, the canal was built. And the Mississippi was also used by many migrants, and then a wagon train across to California. Migrants also left because of famine. In 1806, Napoleon of France began a naval blockade of British ports, and was short. Prices rose accordingly. There was demonstrations and riots in Bodmin, St. Austell, Callington, Redruth, and Wadebridge, and farmers resorted to grow crops in many poor, barely cultivable areas of Bodmin Moor, which caused widespread famine. There was also a potato blight, which caused crop failure. Imports from France and Belgium came in, but they were too expensive. Some with farming experience left for their own betterment. There was a family called Foxwell who lived in Mullion on the Lizard. John Foxwell was the son of William. He was born in 1808. William was an engineer, chemist, novelist, Methodist, and friend of Wesley. In 1840, he sailed from Falmouth to Quebec, got to Racine, which is on Lake Michigan, and he walked to Yorkville, where he bought government land for $1.25 an acre, and he farmed cattle. On leaving Cornwall, what did the migrants take? What did they leave behind? Certainly their villages and some relations remained. Wives and others travelled to join their menfolk, but they took with them their personal items they had and their religion. Religion was important to Cornish people at that time. Having migrated to America, it is said that some communities built Methodist churches before they built their own houses. I'm going to talk about 4 religions and their churches. They were Catholics, Quakers, Methodists, and Church of England. This is not a complete list because there were Baptists, Presbyterians, and others. To start with the Catholics, there were a lot of Irish miners who were Catholics in the 19th century. There's a Catholic church in Liskeard, in the Foymore area, which is about, I suppose, 20 miles from Plymouth. It was built in 1831 by Irish miners. The Concrete blocks on the outside are disintegrating due to a condition called mundig. The builders used mine waste and as a sort of sand and cement to create blocks, and this is now disintegrating. The cost will be £110,000 or about $149,000, and the Cornwall Historic Churches are helping. There's a large, if we could go to the next slide, there's a large church in Penzance, the Immaculate Conception. It was opened in 1843. And as you can see, there are extensive repairs going on here. And the church, Historic Churches Trust is helping. Next slide, please. The Quakers, they're a very small population of Cornwall, and they suffered persecution in Britain during the 17th century, particularly during the Civil War between 1649 and 1660, after Charles I was executed. But for some, their destination was to the Delaware Valley and then to the west bank of the Delaware. Some went with William Penn, who distributed parcels of land. Penn, of course, was granted substantial areas of what is now Pennsylvania in payment for a debt which was owed to him by the British Crown. As examples, George Rascarrick from Padstow took 500 acres in a place called Cranberry Brook. And this is a picture of the meeting house at Come to Good, and it's just off the road between Truro and Falmouth. Tywin Hale is the area on the map. It's an attractive building. It was built in 1710 and furnished exactly as it would have been in the 18th century. And on the roof, you'll notice, is a thatch, which is a covering of wheat straw and water reed, which just has been replaced. And again, the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust helped to rethatch the building. The Fox family were shipping agents based in Falmouth. And they provided stores, equipment, and ships for ships. They were Quakers and would have attended this particular meeting house. Charles Fox is a descendant, and in his book On the Brink, indicates that spiritual dialogue often drifted into talk of business matters. And I suspect these talks were extended the service for some time, and you can just imagine it going on in this meeting house. I'd also like to mention one particular member of his family. He was one Josiah Fox. He was a Quaker, born in 1763. He trained as a shipbuilder in Plymouth, and after extensive traveling in Europe and as far afield as Archangel, which is northwest Russia, he arrived in Pennsylvania in 1793. He was introduced to a General Knox, who gave him a clerkship in the War Department. In 1807, he moved to Norfolk, Virginia, where he constructed American warships, including a famous frigate called Chesapeake. He had a son who also became a naval architect between 1826 and 1846. And there was another Cornish Quaker who was born in St. Tudy near Wadebridge, but he didn't spend much time in Cornwall. He was an unsuccessful, bankrupt London brewer. He too became a soldier in the Parliamentary Army during the Civil War, and he was persecuted personally as a Quaker. In 1673, he was heavily in debt, but he managed to acquire 4,600 square miles of New Jersey, again with the help of his friend William Penn. I think he paid about £1,000, but that was presumably borrowed money. Billings is said to have drawn up the concessions and agreements for the distribution of land in New Jersey, and they were parceled up in about 70 acres. And interestingly, the document was signed by him and then by Penn. But Penn, of course, went down in history. Billings, of course, was largely forgotten. A few words about the Methodists. John Wesley, of course, was the principal founder of it. He was born in 1703, and he was a Church of England clergyman. He went to Camborne, Redruth, Grenap in 1843, but wasn't always universally welcomed. There were protests in Falmouth, but he came to Cornwall 30 times. And unlike other Church of England clergymen, the Methodist preacher preached its scripture to holiness. He was persuasive, and each time he preached, he had quantities of converters. The Borlase family came to Cornwall in the 11th century. William Borlase was born in 1696, and he became rector of Ludgeon in 1722. He later took on the rectorship of St. Just. He was an academic. He was interested in archaeology, and one of his famous works was a description of a tsunami from an earthquake off Lisbon, Portugal, which hit Cornwall in 1755. Many houses, particularly around the Mounts Bay area, were destroyed. How many casualties there were, I'm afraid I haven't read his paper. He complained that his commissioners spent time on Sundays in alehouses. He was a preacher, he advocated morality, and he was tolerant of Methodists. He had an older brother called Walter, who was rector of Madron and Kenwyn, again in the Penwith area, just to the west of Penzance. He was vice warden of a stannery, in other words, a place where tin was assessed, coined, and sold in the mining areas. Consequently, he didn't have much time for his parishioners. He was not alone. There were many rectors who were more interested in business and sport than their parish. They were indolent, lazy, and immoral. Parishioners, it seems, preferred the more spiritual Methodism preached by Wesley. William Borlase was highly regarded as an academic. Walter was largely forgotten. Cornwall, of course, was a fairly lawless place, and smuggling was a lucrative occupation. A mine owner in the West Cornwall, again another George Borlase, complained the area was swarming with smugglers. Smugglers were miners, farmers, fishermen, and sometimes backed by more fortunate people like lawyers, clergymen, and landowners. The Cornish smugglers, this is unbelievable, managed to smuggle 470,000 gallons of brandy and 350,000 pounds of tea up to 1770. Tea perhaps was an unlikely substance to smuggle, but in 1770 a pound of tea would cost 5 to 10 shillings, or about 1,120 pounds a ton. Other tactics included wrecking, which involved placing lights on rocky coastlines, encouraging ships to think they were entering a safe haven. There were frequent fights, sometimes deaths, between the excise men and the smugglers. The Church of England clergymen did little to encourage restraint, but Wesley preached against lawless behaviour in the county. And we could go to the next slide, please. This is the pit at Grenap, where he preached some 18 times. Some of you may know it and may even have visited it. The pit is remodelled as a memorial to John Wesley by 4 mine captains in 1806. And it's extraordinary that in this space you could seat 1,500 members of the congregation. It's still used today. The site's a Cornish Mining World Heritage Site. About 3,000 visitors go there each year, and some emigrant Methodist miners, and some indeed from the United States. Methodist preachers had views on migration. They tried to direct discontent, which included the option for migration. The Anglican preacher thought migration was a cowardly way out and didn't advocate it at all. In the mining areas of Redruth, Camborne, and Grenap, in many parts of Cornwall, Methodism grew as the mining population expanded. Grenap itself was said to be the richest square mile in the world. Population in the area grew from 200,000 to 350,000 in the 19th century, and Grenap village alone increased from 4,500 people to 10,000 people. In 1766, there was a Methodist chapel in Redruth, but after 1826, a larger chapel was built. It seated 840 people. Another chapel was known as the Flower Pot, but it burnt down in 1960 and held 1,600 seats. A chapel this size is a testament to Methodist popularity. And we could go to the next slide, please. This is the Methodist chapel in Camborne. In fact, it's one of several that was built. The first Methodist was in a place called Roswarn House, built in 1810 by John Harris, and actually is still a private house today. And he made his money as a merchant adventurer miner, and he owned the higher Roswarn mine. As Methodist numbers grew, they built a small chapel in the town of Camborne. Again, outgrowing this site, a new site was built, which is the one you're looking at, by Sir Richard Vivian from Trellawarren on the Lizard. It was a house, in fact, where Frenchman's Creek was modelled by Daphne du Maurier. The front of the church was actually given separately by the Pendard family, again, mining adventurers and landowners, and it became the Camborne Wesley Methodist Church. It's now got seats about 500. Again, it's been restored, again, with the help of the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust. We move on to the Church of England, which of course became dominant after the Reformation, when Protestants broke away from the authority of Rome. The many Catholic churches in Cornwall became Church of England places of worship. In most Christian countries, villages and hamlets are the centre around which churches and religion was conducted. And of course, religion itself was part of people's everyday life. The churches were important places. Some of the religious sites go back before 1000 AD. Sadly, support for the parish churches has declined. Equally, the benefactors have disappeared. And some churches, bear in mind, were built by the benefactors, the mine owners, the landowners, but others, curiously, were built by people like bishops from overseas in France and Europe, and of course some wealthy people and titled people from up country. If we can move to the next slide. This is the Church of St. Petroc, which is in Bodmin. It's actually the largest church in Cornwall, apart from Truro Cathedral. The site actually dates back to about 540, but the church was built in the 15th century, and Bodmin was a major market town for tin and wool. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is the Church of Pellint. Again, well off the beaten track between Lostwithiel and near Looe. It's near the birthplace of Bishop Trelawney and was his first parish. On the right, you can see the Trelawney Aisle. It contains the staff and seat of the bishop, and there is an embroidered tapestry on the wall to the right with the words of the anthem. On the day I went there, there was a sign saying that the aisle was closed due to subsidence. I wonder whether we'll get a request to repair that. And if we move to the next slide, this is the village around the church. You can see the spire at the back, and these churches, these houses probably date back into the 19th century. But there aren't very many of them in the village now. It's expanded hugely with lots of modern houses. And I would suspect that some of the old ones have now been pulled down. If we move to the next slide. This picture is of St. Cleer, which I've mentioned several times before, in the mining area of the Caradon Hills, which is again the Foymore area, and it was the eastern side of the county, which the map showed. The village was described as one of the prettiest in Cornwall. The village surrounds the church, and there are many fine houses built in the 18th century. The miners would have had to have walked about 2 miles to each of the pit, which are the minions and the engine house I showed you before. And the village still retains miners' cottages, and the miners' hall, built in the 19th century, is a trade union meeting house. We go to the next slide. And this is the meeting house as it is. What it's used for now, I don't know, but looking through the windows, there is some kind of meeting activity going on there. And if we move to the next slide, these are two cottages in the village. The one on the right is dated 1844, and the one on the left is dated 1855. The rent in 1850 varied between 50 shillings and £3 a year. The renters had a plot of land which they were allowed to grow vegetables on. This was quite important because when the miners were out of work or the prices were low, they did have some means by which they could grow vegetables to feed themselves. Another slide, please. This is another slide. Oh, sorry, yes. This is some other cottages. The only difference with these ones are that there's been some modern embellishments on them. There are quite a lot of plastic doors and plastic windows, but that more or less is what they looked like. The church, incidentally, is to the left of the picture. New slide, please. This is the church of St. Sampson. Again, it's not far from Callington, which is sort of halfway between sort of the Tamar estuary. There was Plymouth and Bude up in the north. It's one of the places where Bishop Jonathan Trelawney was appointed rector, again in 1673. The building goes back to 1333 and was said to have been a religious site as early as 900 AD. The church has been extensively restored. The repair costs to date have been £356,000, roughly $480,000, and the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust has contributed to that amount. Some money was provided by an American donor who lived nearby, and apparently he just turned up one day and saw his family connection and decided to give some help. Next slide, please. This is the church in St. Justin, Roseland, and this is on the east bank of the Fowl, more or less opposite Falmouth. And it's in a little tidal creek, and there's a little basin with a bar that comes out, and this church is right on the edge of the creek. It was built in the 13th century. It was attacked by the French in 1457 and restored again in 1460 by the then Earl of Warwick, in other words, a wealthy contributor. The graveyard, which you can't really see from the picture, is considered one of the best gardens in Cornwall. It's nurtured by a team of volunteers, and the church itself is in a really romantic position, very popular for weddings on the shores of the tidal creek. In fact, some brides and grooms actually row out of the creek onto the main river. There are several graves in the yard to the Pascoe family, but the family, of course, were not only boatmen who operated on the Roseland farmers, but they were also miners. In America, I understand the Pascoe family appear in businesses. They're in construction, machinery, and steel. The next slide, please. This is the church in Foy, which is a small port on the Foy estuary. It's about 6 or 7 miles from here. It was an important port for the export of China clay, and has recently been the destination of cruise ships, which has been good for the Cornish economy. It's the home of the Trefy family, who still live door to the church in a house called Place. There was a Hugh Peters, who was a third-generation refugee from Antwerp. He was born in Foy in 1598. His mother was a Trefy. The Peters family were merchants who owned ships and harbour property in the town. He went to Cambridge University. He took up a Puritan conviction. He was ordained. He lived in the Netherlands and for a while adhered to the non-separative tenets of the Church of England. Peters emigrated. He went to Massachusetts, where he raised money and built ships. He created a trading relationship with the West Indies, importing cotton, and he helped found Harvard University. In 1636, he became a pastor at Salem, but he returned to England in 1641. He joined the Parliamentary Army in the Civil War. The people of Massachusetts didn't approve of that, and they excommunicated his wife, who was still living in Massachusetts at the time. Peters cut off relations accordingly. And as a soldier, he advocated the execution of Charles I. He was therefore what was known as a regicide, and he too was executed. New slide, please. This is the Church of St. Trudy, and I mentioned Edward Billings, who was a Quaker and said that his origins were in St. Trudy. This is the Anglican church on the edge of the village, and it features back to the 11th century. It was extended again in the 15th, 16th century. I mention it for two reasons. There are several Billings ancestors are buried in the churchyard, and the church needs roof restoration for about £75,000, and the Cornwall Churches Trust is beginning to help. And the next slide, please. This is the church of St. Justin Penwith. You can see it's under wraps, the roof's being repaired. Now, the church is in the mining area of St. Just, not far from Cape Cornwall, in the west of Penwith, again shown on the map. And I want to have a little short aside here and talk about the Metallic Mine, if we move to the next slide. It looks misty, and it is. It's foggy on the day I took it. It was in the middle of winter, but that's not uncommon for that part of Cornwall. There's quite a lot of fog, which hence the reason why there were a lot of wrecks, particularly on the Cornish coast, as well as in the Isles of Scilly. I just thought I'd show you actually how it quite often looks. It, of course, was famous, not least for its appearance in the series Poldark. The first record of the mine was 1721, when the land was actually leased by Lord Falmouth. The mine is at sea level below the cliffs and extends well out under the sea. In 1815, a pumping shaft was put in. In 1820, the mine was partly abandoned. In 1836, it was sold to a Stephen Harvey James. In 1842, copper was found, and in 1858, a diagonal shaft was built to extract the ore. It angled down at about 45 degrees, and the ore was pulled up via a chain in trolleys to the surface. The chain sometimes broke, which of course caused fatalities. In the 19th century, there was an author called Wilkie Collins, and he paid a visit to Cornwall in 1850. He visited the mine, and very interestingly, he described his visit underground. He says he was dressed in miner's clothes, which he describes as a flannel shirt, canvas trousers, canvas jacket, all of which were in a copper colour. His visit included a perilous descent down the main shaft by ladder. He was guided down a tunnel 450 yards under the sea. He'd gone 120 feet down, but it was aware that men were actually working 250 feet below him. He was encouraged to sit down in the tunnel, and he says he can hear the surf hitting the cliffs above him. And he describes lumps of ooze coming through the roof of the tunnel, where the sea is penetrating through the cracks in the granite. From the way he writes, I'm not sure he enjoyed the experience. And actually, it must have been incredibly difficult for miners to work in that sort of environment, particularly with the noise of sea just above you. It's also known that a number of migrants moved from this part of Cornwall. To conclude this part of my talk, there's been a long history between Cornwall and America. And it's pleasing to note that many who suffered poverty in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century managed to find a new life. I suspect, however, that many American citizens are unaware of their Cornish heritage. I can believe that many people tend to look forward in their life rather than backwards. Yet, according to the numbers of visitors, which I described at Grenap, there are numerous people from the United States who do have an interest in their heritage, and that's why I'm appealing to you today. Our interest is to preserve ancient churches, which are distinctive part of the Cornish history, and indeed some of yours, and would briefly like to explain what we try and do to fulfill our message. Repairs often cost tens of thousands of pounds. I mean, I gave you examples at South Hill and indeed St Tudy. But because of the number of grants we actually give, we can only give us relatively small amounts. Additional money is often raised by local people who get funds from events, some historic building charities, and from other grants. And I'm going to show you a few slides showing more detail how we operate. A new slide, please. I won't repeat it, but basically we do about 15 to 20 grants a year. And the charities run entirely by volunteers, some of whom have professional skills. Others like me, I'm a an area representative. I visit the site. I look at the repair that they want to do and then report back. And the committee then decides what they're going to give. A lot of the next slide, please. As you can see, 4/5 of the churches were built before 1550. So there's a long history going back. And we want to work to preserve this heritage. And you can see that we encourage appreciation of the churches. We make try to encourage the buildings more attractive to worship in. We make the buildings better, suited for community use. We engage local communities, and we improve the churches overall. Next slide, please. We prioritize activities to structural work. We support windows, monuments, paintings, organs and clocks and bells. The church at South Hill, which I showed you, have recently restored their bells, although rather than having peelers and those people pulling the bells, it's now done electronically. The minimum grants are £250. They're mostly to do with gutters and repairs, again, to stop further damage. New slide, please. So how can you help? We strongly think that our mission is worthwhile as it produces the repairs to these wonderful buildings. And as Americans, I understand that it's helpful that you can have tax advantage. And you can do this by going through an approved fund known as CAF. And I've shown you the website there, cafamerica.org. And I would encourage you, please talk to your friends who you think might be interested. If you'd like to contact me and for some help or some information, my email address is shown below. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope it's given you a perspective on Cornwall as it was during the time of the Great Migration. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Charles. That was amazing. We learned so much from that and the work that you and your organization, Cecilia, who I think is the president of your organization's on our call today also.
Only the chair, but yes, Charles, thank you very much for doing that. I certainly learned bits that I didn't know as well. So, but we do need a lot of help. I mean, Charles said 15 to 20, which is right, but last year, in 2025, we actually made 36 grants, and total was £159,250. 84% more money than we had giving out in 2024. It's a never-ending effort to try and provide seed money so these buildings are there for the next generation.
Beyond yourself and Charles, how large is your organization? How many people are involved with your mission?
Well,
5, all volunteers. Charles.
There are people who are sort of historians who go around the churches and history, but there are people like me who try to fundraise. There are of which there's a committee of about 5 or 6, and I suppose Cecilia will correct me. There are about 20 others who are actively involved. So it's quite active, and we do try and help as many people as we can. But I hope really that I've tried to sort of connect you with, I know it was 200 years ago, but it is quite interesting seeing where these people lived, and exactly that nobody really talks about the numbers of people who actually went. And my view is that there were huge numbers of people who went. And I mean, I look at it as from reading into it, and there must have been quite a lot of destitution. And a lot of people must have felt my future isn't here. I can get to America, and as you can see from the prices I gave you, it wasn't that expensive to go. It must have been miserable traveling out there, steerage, but there was an ambition, and people could see a better life when they got to the other side. And mining was probably the most important facet of life down here during that time.
Great. Any comments or questions from the attendees?
Hey, Charles, could you drop your email into the chat so we can get it off not off the slide?
Yes, I can.
That would be great. Great talk. Learned a lot. Have you published any articles is the question.
Not on this subject. I do, but not with this. Hang on a second.
Charles is almost a world authority on walnut trees.
Yes.
Oh, well, then you're familiar with California walnuts, then.
I am, yes.
They're grown about 100 miles from me, 150 miles from me. We have walnut trees here where I live too, but the major is over in the Sacramento, San Joaquin Valley for me.
Where have I got to with this? Message here. No, I had them when I had a sort of plantation. It was quite rare in the UK to have it because basically they really died out during the latter part of the last century, and we basically started growing them again.
Interesting.
Because we thought climate change was about to hit us, and I had about 60 or 80 trees. And eventually got sort of interested in it. And normally with these things, I write notes. And over 8 years, I wrote these notes and then turned it into a book. And the fascinating thing about it was that I looked at the California growth from perhaps a different perspective to what you might have looked at it for, because it became the wood that was used for the dashboards of Jaguar motor cars. So that when the trees in California ended, in other words, they finished their economic life from a nuts point of view, the root was sent to Italy, where it was boiled for 3 days and peeled like a potato peeler, flat packed, and came to England and was installed in Jaguar motor cars. And it got
Wow.
lots of funny little anecdotes like that, which were which I find really interesting. And actually, I went to the factory and saw it being done, but that's another story.
Very fascinating. Yeah, because the tree industry in California is kind of hitting rock bottom right now.
Yeah.
The nut tree stuff.
Did you get that? I've just sent the email address.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because I might email you because I have a question for you. So I'll put this into my email address because
I'll also put the CAHS website on.
Thank you, Charles. I kind of have a genealogy mystery, so I thought maybe I'll email you and see what you can help me figure out.
I'll see what I can do.
Yeah.
Did you get that one too?
Yes.
Good. Great.
Margaret and I are in a Cornish book club, and we just read a book. It's a fictional book, but it was set in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan about Cornish immigrants and miners, and it was called The Saffron Fun Chapel.
Oh, no, I didn't get to read that book.
Yeah, and in the epilogue, after the whole community had kind of dissipated, the chapel still remained, and it was the link of the modern ancestors to those past people. And your talk, Charles, made me think about this is a way that we're connected, even though the people are gone, the buildings are still standing that our ancestors worshipped in and congregated in. And, those buildings are now also starting to need some help to be sustained. Otherwise we'll lose that link to our past. So I think your mission is critical for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the old churches, you go into them, they are wonderful architecture inside them. And again, one doesn't know who the people who left. I mean, there are obviously some lists of them. There's a book called The Cornish Miner in America, which just does nothing but lists people who emigrated. I'm afraid it was too involved like that for me to read it all, but it did give some. The first part of the book was quite interesting on the subject. But of course, then you can imagine, and I hope the imagination sort of runs from the sites that I've shown you. You can imagine those people there, and you can imagine them going to the port and then going overseas, and then dispersing in America. I mean, I'm told that the number of people who went to America numbered about 200,000, and that there are actually over 2 million Americans now with Cornish descent, and some of them don't know it. I mean, one must bear in mind as well that quite a lot of people, again, I showed you from the figures, they migrated down south from other parts of the country and other areas. I mean, Irish miners came in, and there were presumably, I mean, I don't know, but there were obviously miners, deep miners, coal miners from the north, and they could have easily come down here as well. It's still a mystery, and as I've said, that there isn't very much written about it. Certainly not in England, and that's that's where with this I basically started from scratch. And obviously I can see the old engine houses and all the rest of it, but actually when you dig into it, there wasn't quite as much information as I thought, which is why I tried to give you something a bit more interesting. I mean, the areas around which is not far from here, but the Caradon Hills. I mean, I don't know whether anybody's ever heard of it, but it's there, and actually in terms of pure mining life, the village 2 miles away from the pit, and you can really imagine their lives. And when I went around and took photographs of those cottages, one really thought, you're looking back at something that people who were there 200 years ago, and that I found really interesting.
Terrific. Well, thanks again for sharing your research and the work, both you and Cecilia today. with us. I'm going to stop recording now, but after I stop recording, we can still ask questions and have conversation. But
yeah,
we'll get this video posted on our website and our newsletter going out in a few days. I'll share the link so that anybody who couldn't attend live will have an opportunity to review it and make a donation to your cause.
Thank you very much. Thank you.